Well, thank you all for coming. I'm Alan Brinkley. I'm moderating this event. 4 years ago, more or less tonight, I moderated another event, not in this room, but in a room nearby, and had never seen such a depressed group of people. Maybe there's some depressed people here tonight, but I suspect most people are not. So let me introduce the participants in this discussion. To my immediate right is Katha Pollitt, who is clearly known to most people here. She is the columnist for The Nation. She in a column called Subject to Debate. She's also a poet. She's written a number of books, published a number of books of essays, the most recent of which is Virginity or Death. Is that right? No. Learning to Drive. I'm sorry.
Yeah, forget Virginity or Death. That's the old book. Buy the new book.
They all have such good titles. It's hard to skip over them. She's also a graduate of the Columbia School of the Arts, among other institutions. And so we're very glad to welcome her to Columbia. And to my far right is Hendrik Hertzberg, who's senior editor of The New Yorker, and among other things writes most of the weekly comments in the Talk of the Town section of the magazine. He's had a long history of working at The New Yorker, going back to the Shawn days. Spent 2 terms as an editor of The New Republic, ending in 1992 when he returned to The New Yorker, and along the way he served for several years as the chief speechwriter to Jimmy Carter. And his most recent book is Politics, Observations, and Arguments, which was published in 2004. Is that right? Mm-hmm. So I'm going to ask Katha and Rick just to say a few words to get us started. Maybe we'll have a conversation among ourselves for a few minutes, and then we'll open the floor to all of your questions and comments. Katha?
It's wonderful to be here, both with these incredibly distinguished people and also on such a wonderful day. I am so happy. I'm completely exhausted, so if I don't make any sense, I hope you're exhausted too and you won't notice. But it is really quite an amazing day, and one that I have to say I didn't think would happen. In fact, when I was thinking what I would say here today, I thought I would sort of structure it as sort of things I've learned. And the first biggest thing I learned from this campaign is not to be so cynical and depressed. Because I had become cynical and depressed over the course of, well, my entire life, actually, but most saliently the last 8 years. As one just watched, the Constitution thrown away, and Guantanamo, Katrina, Iraq, Afghanistan, threats to women's rights, just the total trashing of the idea of actually knowing anything or being qualified for your job, caring if things were done well. I think that was all a very conscious idea, the idea of delegitimizing government as as helpful at all was, I think, part of the conscious program of the Bush administration, so that he could get rid of it, drown it in the bathtub, as Grover Norquist said. And so I did something sort of strange that I want to tell you about, which is I bet money on McCain. I did this way back in the. It isn't as bad as it sounds. I did this back in the spring, but then I did increase my bets whenever I was given the opportunity to back out. I said, no, let's go double or nothing. And so now I owe a lot of money, but that's okay. That's really good, because I did this because I wanted. You know how it is, like if you change your mind, you can forget that you ever had the first opinion. You think you always thought the end thing, especially if you turn out to be right. And I want to know. I want to remember this. I want to mark that I don't have faith in the American people. I just think that the Republicans are these kind of geniuses of the manipulation of stupidity and just manipulation, period. And so I bet all this money, and now I've lost it, and that's really great. I really, and the reason is, and the other reason I made this bet is I read this piece by Sean Wilentz today, who spent, the entire campaign. I mean, he's a great historian, but he did spend the entire campaign arguing that Obama could never win because he was like Adlai Stevenson. He was just a pointy-headed intellectual, no heart, no political skills. I mean, how wrong can a person be? A man's a political genius. But anyway, now Sean Wilentz has forgotten that he ever said that, and so now he says that people like me are sanctimonious liberals because we thought Obama couldn't win because white people wouldn't vote for a black person. And I did think that. I did think that some white people would, but not enough white people, especially a secret Muslim, which was another important part of the imaginary story of Barack Obama. I am really glad to be wrong. Never has anyone been so glad to be wrong because enough white people did vote for Barack Obama, and I think that's really interesting. And so I learned that. I think that another thing I've learned, what else did I learn? I'm so tired I don't even remember my things I learned. Oh, I know. I learned that the person matters in politics. Now, it's amazing that I didn't already know this. I can just see Rick saying, oh my God.
I learned that too this year.
The first person I was for, I'll tell you, the first person I was for was John Edwards. And the funny thing is, I never liked him. But then I would think, you don't know him. What do you mean you don't like him? You don't like the media-manipulated image that has been given to you, the hair, the house, all this. And I thought that even after I met a reporter who covered John, who was assigned to cover the John Edwards campaign, I said, oh, so what do you think of him? He says, I don't like him. I said, why? He says, oh, the hair, the house. And he gives the same speech and all this. And I didn't like him either. He just seemed very phony to me. But I was at a party, and who was there but Catherine Newman, the very great sociologist who has written many books about poor people and near poor people, lower middle class people, and their economic troubles. And she was for him, and she was advising him. And I said, well, I don't really like him, Catherine. She says to me, Katha, I don't look at the person. I look at the policies. I felt so rebuked. I felt I'm so superficial. Right, not the person, the policy, the policy. So then I felt I had to support John Edwards. But not only does Barack Obama show how wrong that is, John Edwards himself proved how wrong it is. Because if I had been victorious in my support of the policy and not the person, we would have been in enormous trouble. Because John Edwards had some personal problems that would have seriously told on his ability to win the election. But anyway, but the person is, it turns out it is important. Barack Obama is a wonderful politician. That's important. And he is a wonderful politician because he communicates, those qualities that Sarah, what's her name? Sarah, what?
Palin.
No, not Sarah Palin. Sarah, the comedian on TV whose name Sarah Silverman talked about in her wonderful video about the great stuff where she says he's the best, he's the goodest, he's the most kind and wonderful, smartest person in the world. He did communicate being a good person, and he communicated being a person able to make a bridge between the people who he agreed with and the people he didn't agree with. And that's something that Hillary Clinton, who actually was making these bridges all the time, I mean, she wasn't, God's gift to the left, she couldn't do that. She communicated dissension, and I don't like you, and you're wrong and I'm right. Whereas Barack Obama would always be sort of like, come be part of my club. And he made people want to be in his club, and that combined with the utterly disastrous McCain campaign had all these Republicans voting for Barack Obama. And at first I thought, oh, who needs them? And then I thought, wait a minute, what do you mean who needs them? We need them! We have to win the election. We can't do that if only the people that agree with me vote for Obama. They did, we've tried that. It didn't work out. So I learned that the person really matters, and the person really mattered especially for Barack Obama, because I have to say that one of the one of the points that was made in some very brilliant emails that flashed by my screen repeatedly, and maybe by yours too, is that what would have happened if Sarah Palin and her life situation had been that of Barack Obama? So let's say Barack Obama had a teenage daughter who was pregnant and who was going to marry, maybe, this, I bet the marriage is off, actually. But it was, you know, this high school dropout, sort of roughneck, tattooed guy. I don't think that would go over so well. There were all kinds of ways in which Barack Obama had to be very perfect because he was a black person and he needed to make white people comfortable with him, and he was able to do that. That's kind of amazing. And with Sarah Palin, everybody's saying, oh, I understand, these are the normal things that happen in family life. That's not the usual response when a black teenage girl gets pregnant, is, oh, these are things that happen in life. No, you're the reason why the country's falling apart. So, you know, I give tremendous props to Barack Obama for being a wonderful person and being a person who had both a sense of humor and a sense of tremendous dignity. I was so impressed when he was asked this question, the underwear question. I couldn't believe this. You know, it's like we live in a country of children. And they asked him, as they asked Clinton, you know, what kind of underwear do you wear? Do you wear boxers or briefs? And unlike Clinton, who actually answered that idiotic question, Barack Obama said, you know, I'm not going to answer a humiliating question like that. And then he says, but I will tell you, I look great in them. So he made a little joke about it. But he didn't answer the question. Then he immediately segued to talking about how he didn't like it when, you know, hip-hop people of, you know, whatever race, the men, wear these, you know, they have their pants hanging down around their knees and they're going around with it. And he says, you know, you're walking with your mother or your grandmother, you know, have a little dignity. And I said, I like this man. You know, that shows I'm old. So anyway, there was something else I learned, and that I learned that people are not so dumb, you know. I learned to have a little faith in people. So that's really good. I learned that, you know, that an economic crisis like we're in now really concentrates the mind. And you could even be a little bit racist, but you'd say, I'm going to vote for the black guy because he's really smart. And we really need a smart and steady, untemperamental, flying around like a chicken with its head cut off like McCain was doing, and nominating Sarah Palin, selecting Sarah Palin and all this. We need that kind of person to guide us through these difficult times ahead. And I'm just really proud that people were able to see that. And I even think that some of the people who are so racist, they don't want to be racist. They know that that's kind of old school. You know, they'd like to be different. And I think people, you know, if you just looked at the McCain campaign, it did look very last century. And so I hope we're all looking ahead, and I find myself thinking all kinds of things like, yes, we can, I want to be the change I want to see in the world, I'm the one I've been waiting for, all this, you know, and I'm just going to go with it, and I'm sure I'll be very disappointed someday, but right now I feel just great.
Oh, that's lovely. That's lovely, Katha. That bet that you made sounds like one of those exotic financial instruments that brought us to our current pass. I actually bet on Obama about, well, I was allowed to roll over a bet. I bet my first bet was with David Remnick. I bet him that Mike Huckabee would be the Republican nominee. And then when that didn't work out, he let me roll it over into Obama versus Hillary. So I stand to collect. Perhaps I should forward the money to you. Well, I come to you with a completely empty head, really, because like a lot of people, I guess, the whole organizing principle of my life for 2 years has been aimed at a wall that we've just passed through, and now we're on the other side of it, and I don't know what to do. So I'll just, you know, what do you do with yourself now? I don't know. I've got a BlackBerry in my pocket here, and on the way over here, I was still looking at the same websites I've been looking at for the last 6 months, and I realize I have to find a new way to occupy my mind. I too never dreamed, or am surprised that I lived to see the day that a brown-skinned man is going to be President of the United States. And I feel, and an extraordinary man at that. I guess there are 3 things that I didn't think I'd live to see. You know, one is a really competently run Democratic presidential campaign. And yes, a person of color being president of the United States, and I forget what the third one was. But say, well, that's a good one. Yes, thank you, Yvette. Yeah, actually, I was for an Obama Jim Webb ticket as a special interest kind of thing, because Obama is a real writer, and what made me drink the Kool-Aid, you know, what turned me into an Obama, a passionate Obama supporter was reading Dreams from My Father. How many people here have read it? It's going to be, and one of the great things about this this election is that book now is part of the American canon. There's nothing like it, as far as I know. There's no book written by an American president before he became president, and maybe after, that is as fine a piece of literature as that book is. That book, and there'll be a Library of America, maybe before Obama's 2 terms are over, there'll be a Library of America edition of his works, which would be the 2 books, and then his best speeches. I guess I've met him twice. Once was at a White House Correspondents' Dinner just after he was elected to the Senate, and I'd been following his career, and the New Yorker has run many pieces about him, including a piece when he was running for the Senate. And my wife, who's an editor at the New Yorker, actually commissioned a piece. She was at Vanity Fair. She commissioned a piece about him for Vanity Fair when he became editor of the Harvard Law Review. A little piece, but with a beautiful, you know, a little piece about this long in their fanfare section, with a beautiful picture of Obama, and he had that same extraordinary sinuousness. You know, part of his success, I think, is physical. You know, the grace, just the way he moves. You know, the way he lopes up onto a stage, the way when he sits down during those debates, you could see when he'd sit down on the stool, he'd come to rest. You know, he doesn't fidget. He's at his ease, and he puts everybody else at their ease, it seems, the whole country. Temperament counts. It's interesting that in several past elections we've talked about personality. And it's been a kind of degrading notion that we're going to choose our president on the basis of personality, summarized in the notion of who would you like to have a beer with. And this time the conversation got pushed away from personality and to temperament. And that has turned out to be one of the secrets of Obama's success. We're going to be thinking about it a long time, about how it is that this man got to be where he is, and I'm just trying to think it through now. It's routine to say that here's a guy with an exotic name or an unusual name. Well, this name is more than unusual. You know, Dwight D. Eisenhower, that's an unusual name. Barack Hussein Obama, and that name last night was transformed from a political liability into a diplomatic asset. I'll be very surprised now if he isn't sworn in with his full name. But there's something about the uniqueness of his background, which is both completely unique and completely representative in its uniqueness, because it turns out that all of our backgrounds are unique in some way or another. Americans, no matter who we are, unless we're absolutely recent immigrants from some very closed up country, we're all descended from all sorts of things that most of which we don't even know what they are. But I thought from the beginning that one reason that it's kind of a controlled experiment in color prejudice, because Obama is not a descendant of the American dilemma, in a sense of he's not descended from enslaved Africans. He's descended from, and so maybe he doesn't carry. I'm just thinking this out loud. I don't know whether there's anything to it, but he doesn't carry the charge, or didn't initially carry the charge, and then once he became just Barack Obama and not a symbol, not a representative of a group. You know, it's curious that right now, after all the newspaper leads are saying he's the first African American president of the United States, suddenly. Yeah, but we've known for a long time that was not the most important thing about him. He genuinely is the first president of the United States, or will be, who happens to be African American. Not that that's an unimportant part of him at all, any more than it was an unimportant part of John F. Kennedy being the first Irish Catholic president of the United States. It's not determinative. It's not all he is, and it's not why he got elected. So I think I'm going to just stop, because I find that it helps to have a conversation both among ourselves and with you. And I don't have a speech, but I too am very happy. This is really something I never expected to see. It's something that our country arguably didn't really deserve, and we're very lucky that we have stumbled into what looks very much like a president at a level of potentially of our very highest that we've ever had.
Well, thank you both. Maybe I'll just say a word about why I think Obama won this election. And it may be that out of keeping with the sort of ecstatic quality of everybody's feelings about this election, but I think, you know, if you look carefully at not only the polls and the projections and so forth, but just at the landscape, it was always extremely likely that the Democratic candidate would be elected this year. And it became especially likely once there was an epic financial meltdown. So, you know, if Hillary had been the nominee, I think she would have won. She might have won with an even bigger margin than Obama did. If John Edwards, minus the scandals, had been nominated, I think he would have won. I think it would have been hard for a Democrat to lose this election. And in fact, the best chance to lose the election was probably to nominate Barack Obama because of just the unknown of what race would do in this election. And the great surprise, in a way, to me was, and I admired him from the first time I saw him, which was, like most people, at the 2004 convention. The great surprise to me was what an extraordinarily good candidate he was, an extraordinarily good politician, but not just a politician, an inspirational figure for many, many people. And I think because he was so good, the issue of race, I don't think it disappeared, and it certainly meant an enormous amount to people of color and many others who care about people of color. But I think he became, in a way, someone who just didn't race seemed not to be a factor in the way he behaved, and the positions he took, and the way he campaigned. And people who might have been made uncomfortable about race found him comfortable. And I think that's not an uncommon characteristic of people, of white people in America who become accustomed to people of color that have been people who have accomplished, Tiger Woods or Oprah, people who were beloved by white people and non-white people alike, simply because of the eloquence or the power or the talent, or in Obama, almost all of those things. So I think Obama is the best candidate we could have hoped for this year in terms of the kind of president he's likely to be. And we're just extraordinarily fortunate, I think, that a man of his caliber could overcome what probably most of us in this room a year ago, 2 years ago, would have thought was an impossible obstacle, overcame that obstacle seemingly so easily. So why don't we just talk for a little bit about, not about what's happened, but about what's to come. And maybe, Rick, why don't I just ask you, how Obama, although he had pretty good relationship with the Democratic Party, isn't really a creature of the Democratic Party or of the political establishment. How hard do you think it will be for him to work successfully with a Democratic Congress, in fact, a much swollen and confident Democratic Congress, and with the Washington world generally, in which he's a relative newcomer?
Well, I think it's going to be rather easier than one might suppose, from the fact that he is new to Washington as it is. I think that part of what will make, I don't think there's a lot of resentment against him as an outsider who usurped among the grandees and backbenchers of the Congress. And I think some of that had to do with some of it he can thank Howard Dean's inspiration for, the 50-state strategy. One of my favorite Obama buttons, and I have quite a few, is one that just has a big 50 on it. It's for the 50-state strategy. And Obama has paid a lot of attention to his thought about this a lot, and he's paid a lot of attention to the Democratic Party and to trying to run his campaign in a way that complements the party and strengthens the party and carries others along with him. And I think he seems to have had coattails. Now, of course, that's partly the luck of the situation. Just as any Democrat who could behave him or herself reasonably well through a campaign probably would have ended up winning this election. Any Democrat would appear to have coattails too, probably because there's unlike I guess Clinton, a lot of other Democrats have been swept in his wake, and a lot of others have found their seats made safer. He also has a fairly clear mandate, I think. He's the first there hasn't been a Democrat who won this large a proportion of the popular vote since Johnson, and or for that matter, this large a proportion of the white vote since Carter. So, and he is, although he's a composed and in many ways kind of hard to read person, he is a sociable person. My boss, Jimmy Carter, was never a particularly sociable person. He's a much more a person of solitude, and Bill Clinton was too sociable. And Obama doesn't have neediness. He doesn't. There's no needy quality about him, there's just this overpowering adulthood that I think will serve him well. Not a very structural answer to your question.
That's a good answer. Katha, what do you think I mean, if you watched Grant Park last night, or the crowds in the streets all over the city, all over the world, expectantly waiting for this moment and exploding with joy when it happened, is this an impossible set of expectations for anyone to live up to?
Well, I couldn't live up to them. Yeah, I think it will be a real challenge. I mean, we have a lot of problems in the world. There's this financial meltdown, and we're involved in 2 wars, and maybe, I don't know, Pakistan too. I mean, all over the world, things are really hopping in a not good way. It would be hard to imagine that he ran a nearly flawless campaign, but it would be hard to imagine that he could have nearly flawless 4 years of actually governing. But maybe he doesn't need to do everything so perfectly. Maybe he can just be like the good enough president, you know, like the good enough mother, the good enough who doesn't just screw her kids up too much. He can be the good enough president, just not screw the country up more than it is already. I just think he's going to be such a contrast gainer, you know, to use Saul Bellow's phrase, that, you know, coming after the Bush administration, if he can just sort of undo some of the worst things they did, I think that will be really great. If he can just close down Guantanamo, if he can just not be so alienating and you know, my way or the highway about the whole world, just to take up some of the open hands that are being extended to us now. I think, you know, just knit us back into the fabric of nations. I mean, I don't know, I feel ridiculous saying these cliched things, but something like that. I mean, we've really kind of been like this kind of rogue elephant country for 8 years. And I think what I felt yesterday was that there are a lot of people that really do want to admire this country, that we represent something very good, which is a certain equality and freedom, liberty, all that stuff, you know, that, you know, a lot of people said to me, you know, France is not going to have a French Arab president. You can't imagine a Pakistani, a British person being prime minister there. I mean, maybe, you know, in some years down the road, yes, but we did it first. So we get points for that. I think, yeah, sure, he'll be disappointed. I mean, he takes stands that I don't like right now. I think his stand on capital punishment is ridiculous. Ridiculous is the wrong word. I think it's really wrong. But I think on the big things, he might surprise us and be really great. I think he'll make good Supreme Court appointments, for example. That's really important.
What do you think has to happen right at the beginning? And I say that because Bill Clinton had such a disastrous first month or two, and in some ways he never really recovered from it. And what do you think Obama needs to do in the first month or so
Well-
to avoid the problems that Clinton...
Well, let me just say something about this expectations business first. That I think that the public's expectations are actually, their real expectations are relatively realistic, partly as a result of the sort of pro-nuance campaign that Obama has run. I think people and also because of the experience of the last, well, 30 years, really. I think there's more understanding than there used to be that a president is not a dictator, and that it's very hard to accomplish big change in our political system. I think he will be able to meet, if he can meet the temperament expectations, kind of. I think people will be watching very closely how he governs, and will be judging him as much on, well, the word style maybe isn't quite the right word, but the feeling of how he handles himself, as much as a list of possible accomplishments and concrete changes. So I think he may. I think the expectations aren't quite as impossible as it may seem. I don't know. I don't know what he has. I get he has to. I don't know. I don't know. I'm sorry. I guess I think he will. I think he will have a very strong energy and global warming, but basically energy emphasis. That will probably be his main priority to begin with.
Well, my guess is his main priority to begin with will be the financial crisis. And I don't expect anybody at this table to have the answer to that one, but I think of Franklin Roosevelt coming into office in something of the same, under something of the same circumstances, a discredited predecessor, a tremendous financial crisis, in many ways worse than the one we're encountering now, worse in many ways, including the capacity of people to understand it. And he came in not very highly regarded. No one really thought of him as a heavyweight. He had run a much more cautious and conservative campaign than Obama did, and really campaigned because he knew he would win as long as he didn't screw up too much. And yet he came in like a dynamo and did 100 different things in the first few weeks, some of them terrible, some of them good. But it was, I think, the energy and the ability to experiment and the sense of urgency that he brought in with him really kind of cemented him as a leader that people would follow, even though at least half of the things he did in the first 100 days either failed or simply were ineffectual.
But wasn't there a much deeper atmosphere of fear?
Oh, absolutely.
Than there is now?
There was 25% unemployment just to start, and the banks everywhere were in danger of failing, and it was a much worse situation than we have now. And I wouldn't expect Obama to come in and do the kinds of things that Roosevelt did, but I do think that when you come in to office in a time of trouble and you dither for a while, then you're in trouble. And I think I don't expect Obama to do that, but
He doesn't seem like a ditherer, does he?
No, he doesn't.
I think I have a question, which is, to what extent do you think he'll be helped and get some breathing space to do things by the, you know, shambles that the Republican Party must be in right now, when you think about it, that they now have, I mean, it just seems to me that that always unnatural marriage of the Christian right and, you know, the kind of suburban bourgeoisie and high finance, it can't be, well, that's a sort of three-way marriage, a little polygamous marriage. It can't be going well. I mean, it was quite a setback. And I mean, the choice of Sarah Palin, I think, coming on the disastrous 8 years of Bush, has to make them think. And you'd think maybe they've got the long knives out for each other a little bit. And when you have all these Republican, I was just so struck by all these Republican commentators and important people like Colin Powell and this one and that one all coming out for Obama. That's kind of unprecedented, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I guess the Republican Party, and I have mine as a question too for Alan, really, wasn't it a very different Republican Party that Roosevelt faced than the one that Obama will face? It feels like the Republican Party has been gradually distilled into an essence of talk radio conservatism. I mean, a great deal of it is that there's a big conservative infrastructure in place, ready to be mobilized, that wasn't there. That Roosevelt had to face, I suppose, some conservative newspaper owners but was there anything that this talk radio and the conservative infrastructure lives through combat, not through being nice?
Yeah, well, the Republican Party in the 30s, which was a pretty weakened party then too, it was a very different party from what it is now. And it was different, first of all, both in its regional presence, in its class profile. Hardly any workers were Republicans in the 20s and 30s. But also in its capacity to promote its ideas, and that's the big difference between the Republican Party and the right generally then, and even into the 60s, and now, is that the right has this extraordinary infrastructure and this incredible capacity to get their ideas out and to mobilize their constituency behind them, and so we shouldn't be too smug about the tremendous victory of the Democrats. We've seen those before, to be followed fairly quickly by a tremendous setback in 1964 and 1968. Mm-hmm. I think we shouldn't underestimate the Republican Party today. It's a narrower party than it was in the 30s, geographically and otherwise, but it's a big party, and it is a very effective vehicle for mobilizing its constituency. The Democratic Party did an extremely good job of that this year, and we have to hope, at least Democrats have to hope, that they'll keep it up too. Maybe we should take some questions from people in the audience, and there are microphones in the aisle, so just stand up and walk to the microphone. Yeah.
These are two unrelated questions. You can choose whichever one you... all of you have mentioned the centrality of the financial crisis in getting Obama elected, and and what he'll have to face now. I'm just curious about whether you think that the people whom he's been turning to for advice and so on, and who's likely to. Yesterday, I was watching some of the TV programs, and they were saying that Rubin and Summers and all these people who were very much part of Greenspan's sort of coterie and are sort of associated with the crisis and the troubles. And if he's going to lean on them in the coming years, is it likely that he'll be able to respond to the crisis in the way that needs to be done? So that's one question. The other question is actually one diagnostic one about the campaign. I have a sort of instinctive understanding of a turning point in the campaign. Was that speech that he made in response to the troubles with Reverend Wright. There was something really mobilizing for a lot of very different kinds of people who were reassured by it. I mean, not people who were necessarily put off by Reverend Wright even, but people who might have even have thought that Reverend Wright had some sensible things to say, but thought that his response to it had a kind of maturity and depth in a politician. Did you feel also, Katha and Rick, that was a really crucial turning point in people's perceptions?
I thought that was a wonderful speech. I think it persuaded the people that it persuaded, but Reverend Wright didn't go away as an issue. He's still there as an issue, I think. And that I think, there is that, every now and then somebody will come out and say, he's a politician. He's from Chicago. He joined that church because he had to be in a church to have a base, and he didn't really pay too much attention to what was said from the pulpit, and now he's kind of stuck with it. I thought he diffused that issue as well as it could be, and fortunately, John McCain and Sarah Palin also had religious associations that were, completely disgraceful, and so, I mean, at least to me, that kind of neutralized the whole thing. But it wasn't a happy moment, I think. What would you say about that? You answered the economics question.
Yeah, well, on the economics thing, Rubin and company are whistling a very different tune from what they whistled in the heyday of Greenspan. They are talking about universal or nearly universal health care, and they're not talking about budget fetishism. We're going to have a larger deficit, not a smaller one, and Rubin, et cetera, are advocating that, not resisting it. So I don't, but this is not my area of my strong suit. The speech definitely was a turning point, because the right business had the potential to utterly destroy his candidacy. And I think that the key there was that we talked about is that in his search, in his creation of his own identity, in his search for own identity, Obama has thought so profoundly about this subject. And that speech, I think what that speech showed people, especially the elites, because it's kind of hard to say how many people actually saw or read it, although there were several million hits on YouTube, I think. It was the detachment of that speech. It was the fact that that was a great piece of public education. The fact that he was looking at this problem from above and describing it in a way that made it comprehensible. He wasn't stuck in it. This is what I was getting at before, and he's immersed in it. He's immersed in this subject. He's thought about it. He's lived it. But that detachment not really an emotional, that intellectual detachment about it, that ability to describe it and make it comprehensible and therefore not terrifying, was crucial, absolutely crucial. And the financial crisis, I think he probably would have won the election narrowly without the financial crisis. What the financial crisis did was to provide a drama in which he laid to rest fully, and particularly by contrast with McCain, any worries. In a sense, it laid to rest the national security issue. We could see how these two men behave when the going gets tough and when things get scary. And we saw one who essentially panicked, and one who didn't. And it's that more than the fear. I think more than the fear of actual financial ruin for people that helped him. That issue helped him in that way.
Could you comment about what I'm sure will continue with the comments of your colleague Alexander Coburn, who has had many reservations along the way about Barack Obama. And are you at all concerned about the fact, you keep saying that he's a good politician? Well, what exactly will that turn into? In other words, will bipartisanship turn into compromise? Will the fact of what he has shown about bending towards offshore drilling when he was originally against it, and that's a very serious, indeed very serious issue for the country, for climate, and everything else. So I'm not saying that I think it's magnificent that he won, but where are the concerns to be voiced about what will come in the future?
I wish you hadn't mentioned Alexander. Now I'm depressed. Yeah, well, I think it's up to the rest of us to put on Barack Obama the kinds of political pressures that we can to have him do the right thing. I mean, any politician is going to, be vulnerable to pressures to move toward the right, unless they get pressures from the left, and maybe sometimes not even then. But I mean, I think that's our job. And if we don't want him to be in favor of offshore drilling when, there are huge pressures on him to say, okay, let's do it, then we have to make a big fuss, and that goes for everything, I think. So I don't think, when people say, what do you think is going to happen? I have no idea. It depends on events. It depends on the organized forces on the ground through time. I think Alexander is much too cynical. And I am saying that. So you know how cynical he must be.
Hi. My question, and sorry about the voice, I've been campaigning since Friday. But my question was, a lot of people are talking about this election as sort of a paradigm shift. We've been sort of in the era of Reagan, through Clinton, through Bush. And I'm wondering whether you think that Obama can make this shift in how we talk about government and how we talk about regulation and the free market as a value. And can he change the language and the way we talk about government in such a way that it'll be useful for policies? Like, can we get people to trust government to manage health care and that sort of thing? And I was curious as to whether you thought he could do that.
I think there's a real possibility of it, and there's no question that the left or the center left threw in the towel on when I was in my 20s, I guess it was routine for liberals to talk about. There was something called the mixed economy that was discussed. There was there was resistance to the idea that the money in your pocket is something that you created out of nothing. I mean, the conservative idea is that the market is the fundamental reality. That's the only thing that's real, and everything else is a parasite on that. And that idea has gradually seeped its way into the general discourse. And I think there's a real chance of pushing back now, you actually now hear the market discussed in less, not in these quasi-religious terms, but as something that's part of the pattern of society that has its role, but has to be modified by other social forces. So yeah, I think there's a chance of that if he's successful, and I think and one thing he's very good at is teaching and talking.
There's a theory of political realignment that goes back to the political scientist V.O. Key, that posits that there are certain moments in American political life in which there is a critical realignment of party strength. 1896, 1932, 1854, 6 or 8, maybe 1968. And the question really is this one of those moments? And certainly the results of this election and the contrast between this election and actually any Democratic election since 1964 suggests that that is really a possibility. But there's not really any way to know at this point whether this tremendous Democratic victory is the product of a particularly aberrant moment, or whether it's the beginning of a new era in which the sort of free market, anti-government orthodoxy that's dominated both parties to some degree for the last 30, 40 years, whether that's over. I think it'd be nice to think it might be, but I don't think we can assume that yet.
Yeah, and I think that, though, I think it looks more that way than it did in 1980 on the other side from the opposite way, because Reagan looked very much like a fluke in 1980. It did that election was not a mandate for right-wing conservatism until, but they turned it into one. They turned it into one by treating it as one, and I hope that the Democrats will that they will not mistake bipartisanship for surrender, and they should be bipartisan from a position of strength.
Well, look at Bush when he came in, the current Bush, current and for not much longer Bush, who came in with the opposite of a mandate.
The uniter, not a divider.
And he came into office, and even before 9/11, he was acting as if he'd won 60% of the vote. And it worked.
Well, it worked.
It sort of worked.
He was heading down. He was steadily heading down.
Yeah, it worked for a while. He got his tax cuts through. He got No Child Left Behind, and then things were going badly, and 9/11 saved him. It's a terrible thing to say.
But they're still doing that. This is the incredible thing about the Republicans. I mean, if I knew more about sports, I would make a sports metaphor. But it's like they have the ball, and they run with it as far as they can. Then the Democrats get the ball, and they say, what do I have here? A ball. Perhaps you'd like a chance with that. I mean, Bush is still, he's going to use every last minute of his lame dockitude to do bad things. As there was this long op-ed in the editorial in the Times yesterday. They're going to pass new anti-abortion regulations and do terrible things with the environment, terrible things with the Constitution. I mean, it's one thing after another. And it's amazing to me how much chutzpah they have, how much just sheer moxie, and how do we get some of that? We need that.
Here, here.
Yeah.
Next question.
Well, maybe Bush will run the wrong way with the ball for a while, if we're lucky. I had a question. Your perspective on embracing our history and our social consciousness. Does this give us an opportunity to really embrace history and come together as a country in a social consciousness? Long term and short term, I'm going to kind of get your perspective on the short term, but long term, of course, last night it was said by many people that just on our racial scars, our history that we've had, this is a defining moment of change, and that now throughout history this will be taught, and people will be able to say to their daughters and their sons, you can do anything you want in life, and it's true. But short term, can we heal the historical scar we have from the election of Bush over Gore? As a rule of law, how that happened, as a defider, how that happened, of living under the 8 years of depression. Can we actually say now, maybe that was worth it, because would have Barack Obama been elected if Gore would have won? And just so, what's your perspective on history of being able to embrace now what has happened in this cycle, and maybe it's all worked out for the best? So.
It's too early to tell, as Zhou Enlai said about the French Revolution.
Well, I'm, if I understand your question correctly, it is at least in part, how do we use our history to legitimize this moment? I'm a historian, and I don't really think our history is all that useful for this purpose. Much of our history, in fact, would support things that we really wouldn't want to see happen. I mean, history you can pluck anything out of history and make it a basis for what you do next. But if you look at the totality of American history, it's not really a model for what we would like to do, I think, in this era. You know, will we overcome all of our prejudices and with this election? No, but I think it's a step, a big step. Maybe a transformative step, but you know, the bad things aren't going to go away.
Yeah, that question is too big for me, but the question about 2000 and what happened in 2000, I hope we won't forget what happened in 2000. We still have to fix our machine.
Yes.
Even in this election, a shift of 400,000 votes. I mean, Obama got a 7 million vote majority. A shift of 400,000 votes in a half dozen states would have delivered the election to McCain. So we still have to fix the machine because what happened in 2000 was a bad wound. It was a coup d'état, and it has to be prevented from happening again.
Is fixing the machine, in your view, getting rid of the Electoral College?
Well, I don't want to go into my pet cause.
You want to
get
rid of the Senate too, if I recall.
I do, but I want.
Yeah, I'm for
I do, but I want to get. I think it's practical to avoid the bad effects of the Electoral College through an initiative called the National Popular Vote, which you can go to their website and check it out, nationalpopularvote.com, or you can go to my website and look up National Popular Vote. But this is there is a way that is making some progress to make the election a popular election so that all votes will count equally, and you won't have to go to Pennsylvania to campaign. You can do it by subway. If anybody's interested in the details, they can, pursue it with me.
Well, you just answered my question. So, I have a short question. Is it possible that black people will expect more than Obama could offer? If that happens, how should Obama deal with it? Thank you.
Well, there are a lot of black people. I mean, won't they have sort of different expectations? I don't know how to answer that question. I mean, he has, it's been quite striking how little he has said that has been directly directed to people of color. He has spoken a very carefully inclusive language. He hasn't talked a lot about affirmative action. I mean, if you go to his website, he's got all kinds of great, things to say about prisons and drugs and, various causes of the black community, things that are terribly unfair and wrong, but he doesn't talk about them. And I think that's intentional. What will happen as time goes on is hard to say. I mean, one thing that always surprises me is how popular Clinton was in the black community, because he did not deserve it one bit. I mean, no, it was a mystery to me, because not only did he sign the welfare reform bill, he passed a crime bill that, that was very deleterious to the black community. He, after his own commission said how wrong it was to have a differential punishment for people who used the same amount of crack as cocaine or whatever it was, he disregarded that, so that black people who were involved in the characteristic drug of the black community were punished more severely than white people who used the characteristic drug of the white community, even though it's chemically all the same stuff. Really unfair, and on and on and on. He didn't really do anything for urban people, and he didn't do much for poor people either. They liked him anyway. I don't get it. And you have Toni Morrison. He's the first black president. I really don't understand this. So what makes somebody popular is sometimes more ineffable than what their politics are, their policies are, and maybe Rick understands it.
No, but I think, look, I'm no spokesman for the black community, obviously, but my impression is that most black people don't expect or want Obama to be a special pleader for their community, but rather to be president of all the people, and that's the fulfillment of a sort of dream for him to do that.
Hi. Lots has been said about how internationally Barack Obama will function multilaterally, especially compared to the previous administration. But how do you realistically expect the UN's role to change under a Barack Obama administration?
Well, I don't know whether the UN itself will change, but I think the American relationship with the UN will change. Maybe not radically, but I think there will be a better relationship between the United States and the UN than there has been over the last 8 years. And I think the ability of the United States to shape the world has become clearly very limited. We're not willing to use a draft. We're close to being bankrupt. And so to manage the crises around the world that are dangerous to us and to others, we just can't do it by ourselves. So whether through the United Nations or through our allies or through other multilateral forums, I think that we're going to have to begin dealing with the world in a different way than we've tried to do over the last 8 years.
Yeah, I expect to see actually a fair amount of creative action on that front. The Clinton administration, I think, missed a moment where the international system was very fluid and waiting for some sort of real post-Cold War reformation, and it never quite came. And maybe it's not too late now. And Obama's very well positioned to do that. And the UN needs to be reformed, not the way John Bolton wanted it reformed, but in a way beneficial to the world. Fortunately, Bush is a pretty easy act to follow on all these points.
Yes, first a comment. I thought Rick's earlier image of bursting through a wall was a wonderful one, and I want to thank Katha for her answer to his question, what should I do now? What's to do? I think it is immensely important that those of us who want whatever hope we have now as a result of this election, that we push and pull and hold feet to the fire to see to it that something really positive comes out of this. It's up to us as much, if not more, than it is up to Obama and the administration. There's a quick story, and maybe Professor Brinkley can tell me if it's apocryphal or not, although it doesn't matter. Very early in FDR's administration, he met in the White House with a couple of labor leaders, and it was a rather lengthy meeting, and they presented their case to him rather forcefully. And at the end of this meeting, Roosevelt said to them, well, I agree with your positions. You've presented your case marvelously well, and I'm in favor of this. And he said, now it's up to you to go out and make it impossible for me not to do it. I don't know if you...
I don't know either.
I've heard that story too.
Yeah,
I've heard that story too. It's probably apocryphal, but
Right,
it's,
okay.
but it's what happened, actually.
Yeah. Right. The question I have is related to something later. I wonder if you feel that Obama, as the first black president, is in somewhat the same position as Jackie Robinson was in 47. That is, he couldn't just be your average ball player. He had to be really incredible to be the first black ball player. Not only skillful at baseball, but also to be able to handle the racist crap that he had to deal with. And I wonder if you could comment or tell what you feel about Obama being in that position. Is he going to have to be incredibly good or incredibly skillful? Again, of course, we know the bar has been dropped so low now the last 8 years that may be easy, but relative to history.
That's a very interesting question. I could see it either way. You know, either we've now seen Obama for almost 2 years. I mean, this has been a very long campaign, and I think the length of the campaign has familiarized people with him and made him a more comfortable and familiar figure than is often the case when a politician takes office. I think there is still a lot of racism. There are still people going on about the Reverend Wright and spreading, he's in Texas. This is astonishing to me. 23% of the population still believes that he's a secret Muslim. And that is well above the national average of 13%, which is astonishing, given that it's not true. And it has been debunked repeatedly. That shows you, I mean, that's racism. That's racism, plain old anti-black racism mixed with kind of the new xenophobic anti-Islam thing. So I imagine that there's a lot of that in people's minds, not everybody's minds. And there's the whole machinery of talk radio. And if you ever want to think, it's, now we're all happy and it's like Bambi and the Bluebirds, just listen to talk radio for a while, and it's just staggering how full of vicious, vituperation it is. But nonetheless, I think, he is going to be the president. And I think people want he starts out with a lot of credibility, I think. I think people want to, okay, let's move on, let's start governing and fixing things and all like that. So I don't think that it's going to be like, if he makes one little mistake, everybody's going to go back to their inner racist.
Yeah, and keep in mind, there have been two, since Reconstruction, there have been two black Democrats elected to the Senate. Carol Moseley Brown from Illinois, and she was a big flop as a senator, and yet the people of Illinois went out and elected another black person to the Senate. So I think it'll be a lot easier whether Obama is a success or a failure as president. I think it's made it easier for the next black candidate and for a woman candidate. I think it's just broadened the notion of who you can be and be president. You don't have to be like the guys on Rushmore. You can be different.
Also, the demographics of the country are changing too. You know, there's that. There's every year the country becomes less white, less Anglo. Women are surging ahead everywhere. It's just different. And that's why, like, if you saw the picture of, if you saw McCain's concession speech last night in Phoenix, it was such a contrast with all those scenes of, with the scene in Grant Park, which was just a mixture of everybody. Because in the that Phoenix ballroom, it was just white people. It was really kind of amazing. And you sort of think, gosh, aren't they embarrassed? Couldn't they sort of round up some black people and say, just come stand here for a while? And you know, that to me, that's the past. You can't, you will increasingly not be able to win if you look like that.
It's a really unhealthy situation, though, to have a white party and then a everybody else party.
You had to look really hard at the Republican convention to find a black person in that arena.
But what was interesting, if I could just say one thing, was that, you know, Bush made an effort to sort of at least have the people on screen look multi-ethnic, multicultural. He found there were some black people. I mean, not many. But this time it seemed like they didn't even bother. It's just like, okay, forget that. We give up.
Although one thing he does deserve credit for, or maybe he doesn't deserve credit for it, but he did do it, was that by making Colin Powell and then Condoleezza Rice Secretary of State, that was something that was something that helped the rise of Barack Obama, without question.
And to his credit, Bush did this knowing that there would be no political benefit from it. He was not going to get black votes because Colin Powell was Secretary of State. He did it because he wanted Colin Powell to be Secretary. Well, it turned out he didn't really want Colin Powell to be Secretary of State, but he might have thought he did at first. So, yeah.
I was struck earlier when you mentioned, you know, paging through your BlackBerry today, because that's a similar feeling that I had. But as interesting as this campaign was and how fascinating all the stories were, I think it's really striking how boring, really, Barack Obama's campaign was in a lot of ways, because there were really no unscripted, there were no memorable moments, especially in the general election, like at a debate, that you could really single out, like I Feel Your Pain or something, that you would look back at 12 years and say, this is where he really nailed it. And, you know, then there was that irony of McCain asking about strategy and tactics. And I just wondered if that's a function, if running his campaign that way was sort of a longer arc, is a function of anything, that it was able to be successful as a function of anything, if that indicates maybe that news cycle-driven politics is nearing its end, if it was just an anomaly to this campaign, I mean, first of all, if you can agree with what I'm saying, and then what you would account that to.
I thought this was the most exciting campaign in world history.
I thought it was tremendously exciting, but all of the stories, none of the stories I were reading were coming out of the Obama campaign. Do you know what I mean? Like the things that happened every day that were sort of driving when you would go on the internet or something, those were not...
But that was the strategy.
Does that make sense to anybody else?
I thought it was an exciting campaign because of what was at stake and because of who Obama was, but I agree with you that the campaign itself was not riveting. And you compare it to at least the first months of the primary campaign, when everybody would stay up late even to watch his concession speeches because they were so thrilling. And then his acceptance speech at the convention was quite good, I thought. But then every speech was the same. I mean, it really was. He was being very careful, and they weren't bad speeches. And he's a good speaker, and he's good. He always looked good on the platform, and people got excited. But the speeches just weren't that thrilling. He was trying, and in fact, after he went to Europe and got so ridiculed by it, I think he felt that it was almost dangerous to be too charismatic. And so I kind of agree with you, but it
I-
worked.
that-
It worked.
I think that was all quite deliberate.
Yeah.
And that he was a candidate who sprang out of absolutely nowhere with a speech in 2004 that was pure inspiration, that was pure emotion, that was pure rush. And you can't run a 2-year campaign on the basis of a continuous sugar rush. And he paced himself so beautifully. It was never to his advantage to be the front runner in the primary campaign. It was always, and he did the same thing in the general election. He ran slowly, and then the inspiration comes at the very end. Then a rush can do you some good. But if you're going to go, if a campaign that depends on a line that goes like this forever isn't going to get there. It's got to go like this, and then like that.
Thanks.
I think just a couple more questions. Yeah.
Sure. This actually might work well as a follow-up to that, I'm not going to try to apologize for the way Bob Shrum ran his election campaigns in 2000 and 2004, but what I've been very surprised by in this cycle is the similarity of the media strategy between the Obama campaign and those campaigns in terms of, I mean, not in terms of the particular media that they're using, but in the same buzzwords that they use. That Bob Shrum, for example, a lot of his acolytes refer to the need of Democrats to get back the idea of civic religion and progressive values. I mean, if you have one of those consultants in front of you, they'll say you need to talk about jobs, you need to talk about the people versus the powerful. And then this Obama campaign to me seems to be almost the embodiment of what Shrum wanted to see happen in a media message for a campaign. Like he's basically giving Bobby Kennedy speeches in a new context. So, I mean, do you see a qualitative difference between the Obama brand, so to speak, and the Shrum brand?
You got me there.
I think there's a tactical similarity in the campaign to Shrum. I mean, focusing on a small range of issues that polls and other evidence suggest people really care about. In this case, it was the economy. How quickly he moved away from the war when the war stopped to be a major issue in the campaign. But that's, you know, that's how you win elections. It would have been nice, I think, to have had a few more inspirational moments in this period. But
the Shrum brand, as opposed to what Shrum might have actually, let's not get poor old Shrum into, let's not dump on him, but I think the difference between what I see as how the Kerry campaign was run or a difference between the way it was run and the way the Obama campaign was run was in the race speech. If Kerry had been Obama, then when the Swift voters had come along, or before, he would have explained himself. He would have explained why the Swift voters were mad at him, and it was because it wasn't because he was a war hero or an inadequate war hero. It was because he was an anti-war hero, and that's the side of the story that Kerry never told. And whereas Obama, you know what? I guess Obama. Someone asked him, maybe it was one of our people. He had one of the big decisions he made was whether to go small or whether to go big after the Reverend Wright thing, and he decided to go big. Where Shrum or Kerry decided to go small on the Swift voters, and I think if he'd gone big, he might have won that election.
One thing that sort of struck me throughout the election as a trend for Obama was his ability to sort of use data to succeed. That he thanked David Plouffe, and who was responsible for looking at the caucuses and the primaries, figuring out which ones had odd number of delegates, and thus being over 50% could get you 3 instead of 2, and which ones were even, in which case getting up to 60%. I mean, very sort of, you know, baseball statistician nerd sort of way of thinking. And along those lines, the website, one of the websites you and I were probably both checking today, just out of habit is 538, which is
I love
another,
538.
an example of someone who comes from that world of really analyzing data and trying to get the map to fit the territory, and then applying that to a game which has really serious consequences. And that also tied into what I originally struck me about Obama and made me support him early was actually his willingness to work with Tom Coburn, the very hard right, but sort of ideologically coherent guy who they were both interested in doing the Google for government, a very meta, a very abstract and analytical, data-driven, project. And I was wondering how you think that will carry over into the presidency, especially in terms of being able to get away from left-right conflicts without triangulating. If that sort of newfound interest in actual empiricism might presage something positive.
It's a very informative question, and I hope
Time will
you're
tell.
right.
That would be great. That would be great. I wanted to go back and say something about the previous question, though, which is, I think, just here is a way in which being a person of color, I think, helped Barack Obama, which is that just by being himself, he did stand for big things. He didn't have to go on and on about, calling on the better angels of our nature all the time, and the civic religion and all that, because he embodied that, and people understood that. And I think there were people who voted for him. I mean, it was a plus. I mean, white people for whom it was a plus that he was a black person. And I don't mean that in the mean, horrible Geraldine Ferraro way. I mean that he symbolized the way forward.
I think in response to your question about data, of course, you always want to have data of various kinds. I think the kind of data that you're talking about, which is this very highly statistical analysis of political trends and political alliances, I don't think that that's a vehicle that would be transferable easily to a lot of areas of politics and governance, but there are areas. It certainly works well for campaigns, but probably not so well for governance. At least that's my view.
One place it can work is in healthcare. In that, I mean, there is an initiative underway supported by right and left to essentially create a gigantic medical database and mine it for patterns, so that we can. That it doesn't gore anybody's ideological ox to do that. And similarly with this other one that the questioner mentioned.
Well, with apologies to the people who are still in line, I think we'll just take one last question.
My question goes back to a few points that were made earlier in the evening, with also an eye to the future, so hopefully it's good for a last question. Professor Brinkley, you spoke earlier about the role of inspiration. Especially 2 years ago, Obama came onto the scene. He was more inspiration than perhaps politician, and that, we can say, probably garnered a lot of the youth's support. Now, Mr. Hertzberg, you said that temperament was something that probably decided the election, especially in probably after August. He had to trade a bit of that inspiration, it seems, to get this cool cat appearance, that he knew what was going on, that he was in control, and he could respond to the decision to any crisis that might come about. So my question is, in the coming days, especially if he encounters a very troubling first 2 or 3 months, how does he balance this ability to inspire with this cool personality and bring in those elements of temperament and calmness that he exhibited so well on the campaign trail?
I'd say the same way Miles Davis did on the Kind of Blue album.
I think a successful president has to do all of those things. I think a successful president has to be a really good politician, Well, just to choose the obvious example, Lincoln. Lincoln was one of the most inspirational presidents that we've had, not just in retrospect, but even during his lifetime. And yet he was an incredibly wily and clever politician. And he also had real conviction, not on everything, but on the things he cared about. He would really fight for them. He wasn't spineless. And those are all of those ingredients are what presidents need in different contexts and at different times. So
I'm hoping you'll change your mind.
All right, one last question. This is so unfair.
I'm just wondering what you think his relationship with Congress is going to be like.
Well, we sort of covered that, or at least I said all that I had to say about it earlier. I mean, I think it's going to be better than either Clinton's or Carter's was.
They should be grateful to him because they're coming in with bigger majorities and.
But my impression is that most of the New Democrats are more to the right of Obama.
I don't know that that's true.
I don't think that's true.
I read something today where they plotted out sort of where ideologically it's going to be now, and it's a little bit to the left. And really? Some of the people who've lost, some of the Republicans who've lost, were among the more, frothing ones. So maybe they'll have an appropriate sense of, getting the country's business done in a good, straightforward way.
Okay, you don't have to answer the question, but you can think about it. I just wanted to say that I'm a firm believer in, dealing with issues and kind of trying to figure out how to deal with them and move on. But I also believe that people need to be held accountable for things that they have done, especially when they impact on many innocent people. And I was just wondering how you feel and what you think as far as Obama's new administration holding Bush, et cetera, accountable for their crimes, the wars, misdemeanors, and so on. As a grandmother for peace, I try to teach my grandchildren, and as a teacher, I try to teach my students to be held accountable to what they do. And I think that what Bush's administration has done has totally, I can't even think of the words, but it has really done a terrible, it's teaching our children a terrible lesson. It's like basically what I'm trying to say.
I see what you're talking about. I mean, they have, yes, this administration and many people in it are undoubtedly guilty of war crimes that are certainly, in a legal sense, highly prosecutable. I can't see the new administration blowing a whole lot of its political capital on trying to put Bush and company in the dock, but I think there could be a possibility of some sort of a truth commission to bring out and publish the record of what actually happened, because a lot of it is still in the dark. I'd like to see that.
I won't say anything about what I think should happen, but I can tell you what I think will happen, which is that Bush and Cheney and Addington and Gonzalez and Rumsfeld and on and on and on and on will move back to Texas or Wyoming or wherever they're from. They'll make a lot of money. They'll live comfortably. They'll be largely forgotten after a while. I think that's what will happen.
You better be careful where they travel to.
Don't go to Spain, right?
Colin Powell apparently told Cheney that Cheney and Addington that they shouldn't leave the country once they were out of office.
Wow.
Poor us.
Thank you all very much for coming. Thank you, Katha and Ray.